2 points of setup on what side affirmatives world looks like. Firstly, on automation. We would have automation take over the economy to the extent where there's a limited necessity for the basic subsistence of each individual. That is to say that every single person in our world will have sufficient subsistence and doesn't have to work. What would we use in replacement? We would just use stipends and UBIs. And we would notably characterize this debate for both sides to occur under a benevolent AI, because insofar as there is no benevolent AI, we think either case just doesn't work. We would have that as the democratic principles on accessing this AI and stuff like that. Secondly, on norms. We would still say that there exists a set of norms and behaviors which encourage meaning to still exist. What does this look like? People will still have things to do. They are still encouraged to do things. They're not just rotting on a couch. Examples: to pursue new experiences, to look after new skills, to master those skills, to better themselves. All of those things, such as practicing sports, drawing, philosophy, even debating, would still exist under norms and behaviors under our side of the house. Notably, these structures will lend themselves to be productive, things like that. 2 arguments then. Firstly, on why our world uniquely is more equal for people, and secondly, on why we have better fulfillment and meaning for individuals in their lives. 3 observations to begin this first argument. We would say that we guarantee the basic necessities of these individuals, and that is to say that the info slide suggests that there is probably a surplus of productivity, a surplus of production, which means that these people obviously don't work, have sufficient things to live meaningful lives. Secondly, we would say that they are definitionally exempt from coercion. Why is this the case? Because notably, our world requires positive motivation. You were inspired to work. You were not work. You were inspired to seek hobbies. You were inspired to look after your friends. You were inspired to go and pursue new experiences. Notably, in status quo and also on side negative, there exists a norm and a necessary structure of negative motivation insofar as you must work for food, you must work for productivity, you must work to sustain the productivity of the company that you work at, and that is all on competency. The third and final observation we would note is that notably the structure of side affirmative lends itself to be far more egalitarian for the people in our world. Why is this the case? Because all people have to do, have the ability to do similar activities insofar as they are all pursuing different masteries, different things they enjoy doing, different hobbies and things like that. And notably, because of this, and because there is no hierarchy of which interests are inherently more useful to the productive capacity of society, we would say because they all equally have a stake, all equally have this ability to pursue interests, things like that, that just broadly means that society and all of those structures are probably far more responsive to the needs of each stakeholder, far more representative, and probably a more utopic society. Now, next thing I'm going to do is engage with what side negative necessarily must defend. A few things to say here. Firstly, obviously there is a requirement of work to any extent, and that is to say, in their world, automation is insufficient to produce the necessary consumption of every single individual that exists under their side. That is to say that people might work, but there are a significant portion of individuals that still have to work to fulfill the capacity and the output of this general society. What does this mean? Secondly, we would say that under their world uniquely, you must cop all of the harms of negative coercion. That means you must fear to not have enough food on your table. You were pressured, you were stressed and forced to work for the productivity of society and things like that. Thirdly, and uniquely under the system and structure of work, we would say this necessitates a political hierarchy insofar as you have people who are relatively more productive than another individual. They have more skill in certain areas. They are more important to the functioning and to the structures of production. They are more desirable in certain roles. And that just compounds all of the problems that of equality and things like that. Why is this the case? Because partial automation still means that some people have to work, and that means you necessarily displace those who have the least amount of skills. That is to say, the trajectory of the status quo and things like that means that things such as AI and their capacity to, replace the most labor-intensive forms of work and things like that necessarily displace all of those individuals who have the least political capacity to actually opt into political system, change those structures, things like that. And also they just have structurally the least ability to access all of those things. And we will note that the machine and the automation that exists on side negative is one that are jobs that might necessarily not be able to be done by all humans insofar as the productive capacity and the replacement of certain individuals is quite bad. As I explained and flagged earlier, these individuals are likely to be far less educated, are more likely to be far less able to positively contribute to the productive capacity insofar as they have been outworked by AI or outproduced by machines and things like that. Or they're just like less intelligent due to this arbitrary genetic lottery. For those reasons, we say those individuals necessarily must be pushed out by side negative. And the final observation to note under this argument is that there is no reason to actually appeal to these individuals insofar as they had zero political enfranchisement, they have little, minimal to no political recourse, like literally zero access to any forms of political redress insofar as they have zero productive capacity on the side negative. Comparative, we would say that every single individual is equally obsolete on the side affirmative insofar as none of them are actively contributing to the productive capacity of society. They are all equally pursuing different hobbies, different interests, different skills, things like that. And that is to say that all of those individuals will be equally represented uniquely on the side affirmative. A second argument on fulfillment and meaning. The notable piece of framing to, extend the umbrella over all of these arguments is to explain the differences between each individual, and specifically the different preferences of these individuals, we would argue principally is entirely subjective to the whims of what someone wants. And that is to say that uniquely under our world, these your ability to access and your capacity to seek and explore and master different skills, different interests, and whatever is literally engaging, whatever you feel like doing, all of those things are far more accessible on the outside of the house. That uniquely means that these individuals are obviously far more fulfilled to the extent in which they are able to explore what they want to do, get new experiences, things like that. And notably, what is the negative counterfactual? We would say that these individuals, to some extent, at the very least, must cop that they must be coerced to work. So even if some people can access redress, even if some people have fulfillment from work, we would say that is not everyone. Uniquely, that is why they must lose the debate. I'm just going to intuition palm the status quo to end this speech. And that is to explain that there are literally billions of people in the status quo who are brainwashed due to the systems of work, of capitalism, and the extension of those structures. We used to say that every single day they wake up, they lie to themselves to convince themselves, I enjoy this work so that I can pay for food, so I can access skills, so that I can access generational wealth. And the normative pressures of society pressuring you to work, to show up every single day when you hate the things you do, that imposes such a significant barrier to you as an individual and your ability to access what you want to do and what you want to do to be fulfilled, and all of those things obviously is a significant harm. And notably, we will give you a set of mechanisms to explain why this is likely to spread on side negative. Because notably, these individuals are likely to externalize their sense of meaning insofar as when you wake up and you talk to other people, you go oh, that job seems really, really useful. That job seems really, really fulfilling. And they externalize their own inability to find meaning in their own lives. And we would say that is obviously something that is far more likely to happen on the side negative. The second thing to say and explain under this is just we would say that in the majority of circumstances, work is probably not something that you actually enjoy doing insofar as it is agentic as a means to an end. Obviously, the agentic function of work is to get money, and that money is to fulfill your needs, fulfill your actual desires. We would say that we meet all of those desires, and that is why side affirmative uniquely must win this debate.
I think the problem with side affirmative in this debate is that they rely too much on the narrative that capitalism is what making you work, and that's the only reason you work and you're not deriving any fulfillment. But that is actually incorrect, because people need to work in order to get fulfillment. 4 things in this speech. Firstly, what would this look like? Secondly, just fulfillment and purpose, and a major chunk on that. Thirdly, safety of people in this world. And fourthly, why we just go to space and just future human endeavors. Firstly, on what this would look like, we note that we're going to characterize how much work that occurs. It's probably not going to be a lot of work, simply because we have solved a lot of resource production activities through automation, and so the tasks that we actually do would not include farming or producing food or driving trucks or getting energy. And so we've come to a state where there's no scarcity of these resources that are required for people to live on a daily basis. This another thing that this means is that because we don't have people working in these sectors, we have a lot of people who are free, more people, less work, we divide the work amongst people, which means less work and like a greater division of work, which means people aren't going to be working as much as they do in status quo. And the note that the fact that they don't have no economic pressure, and because there's this salt scarcity, they also have the incentive to like work less and not work like 90 hours a week. Secondly, on what this would look like, what kind of jobs that would come up in our world. Note that, like just a fact logic check and like a question that I would like to pose would be, what jobs are actually meaningful to people? These are the jobs that would come like. Panel, these jobs look like jobs that require ethics and moral judgment to some level, jobs that require research, jobs that require some sort of like research, scientific writing, really high scientific endeavors, maybe changing the human DNA or whatever, and obviously the creative arts, movies, TVs, poetry, all of that. These are the jobs that are seemingly meaningful and would still exist in our world. Note that these jobs do require like showing up to work and like actually doing something and producing something. It's not like we just give people the free will to roam around and do whatever the fuck they want. Moving on to my substantive, fulfillment and purpose. Note that side affirmative, other than the classic capitalism is going to make you work and like people don't work, and they haven't, and that without it you will just enjoy life and like engage in skill development. Note that they haven't really given any mechanisms other than like people like to do that. Like there's no concrete mechanisms as to why that people would actually engage into those skill developments in their world. In our world, we tell you that there is a very important need to work in order to get fulfillment and purpose as people. For 5 reasons why. Firstly, just human biology. It's not just capitalism that is making you work. It's actually your biology. There is leftover. We as humans have evolved into a state, and that's literally inbuilt into our brains, where we need to get resources. We feel the need to go out, get resources, provide for ourselves. That is what makes us human. That is what gives us fulfillment on a biological scale. This just means we get fulfillment from like going out, doing something, getting those resources for us. Secondly, people also seek external validation for the work they do that goes on with their internal need and internal motivation that functions from their biology. This looks like just getting social validation from the work you do. If someone tells you to do something and you do that, that gives you like slightly greater motivation, slightly greater validation. If we tell you to do something and then you do it, that gives you greater validation. Just because you get to serve a purpose to society, you get to prove that you're socially contributing member to society, and people just crave external validation. I mean, I do. But anyways, thirdly, on why we get fulfillment and purpose, is that there's some people in this world who just need to be pushed. Note that side negative never accounts for these people, nor does it provide any mechanisms as to why people would actually be motivated to whatever they want to do. Because some people need to be pushed. They need to be presented with options. They do not know what purpose or fulfillment they need in their life, or what kind of avenues they can go down to access that purpose and fulfillment. And we, on our side of the world, we give you options. We provide you with those options to find yourself a purpose and fulfillment. Fourthly, just the opposite of that. Some people just have a lot of interest, know what to do, have a lot of ideas, and they come into a sense of decision paralysis, and that people with a lot of interests and motivations know the options, but they can't decide. What we do in our world is we solve their problems by presenting them a streamlined set of options by removing a lot of the choices that would have existed in status quo. Fifth and lastly, people like to work again just because you get a lot of ancillary benefits from working. This looks like the fact that you had to go to school and go to university in order to get a job in our current world. Where people like to study, you form social groups, and there are a lot of other aspects of working that people actually enjoy. Inside negative, what we have in fulfillment and purpose is people who are bored, people who struggle to find a meaning because either they don't know what to do or they just know too much, and they just are directionless. And in our world, people who actually need to work like every other person because of our human biology, we protect them. And an example would be like, even if people get universal basic income in our world, they would still feel the need to go out and work, because that is just human function. That's how we function. Third point is substantive. Second point is substantive is safety of people. There's two broad aspects of this. Firstly, over-reliance on government and why that's bad. Secondly, artificial intelligence. Firstly, under over-reliance on government, note that this is a fucked up world that they're living in. Government constantly in status quo fucks up distribution all the time, distribution of resources all the time. Unclear why that is being solved. Secondly, we get fewer people working as public servants, and there's too much concentration of power into few people. Note that we understand that there probably would be some level of people working in the government that's distributing these resources. And it's just giving a small group of people too much power to distribute actual life-saving resources. Thirdly, the government, again, as a concept, as an institution, has too much power over you because the resources that you need to survive are being given by an institution that makes them are being completely given by that institution, and which gives them way more political capital over you. In our world, we at least save this by we don't get these humps simply because we have more active members who engage in public life in a meaningful way, and that is a way that adds several accountability measures and makes people more active in public and civic life. Secondly, coming on to artificial intelligence, note that we can't just model out just benevolent artificial intelligence. That just doesn't work. You can't just assume that you create artificial intelligence that's perfect. In our world, artificial intelligence isn't dangerous because we don't need the development of highly sophisticated artificial intelligence. Stuff that requires ethics, stuff that requires morals would be jobs that people would be doing. And then, however, in their world, they require sophisticated artificial intelligence. The problem is the impact of this is if artificial intelligence goes rogue in our world, at least our world doesn't stop functioning. In their world, if artificial intelligence goes rogue, everything that relies on artificial intelligence just stops working. You just lose all of your doctors, judges, lawyers, etc. And the reasons why artificial intelligence is likely to go bad simply because they don't operate on the same sense of morality. They can't be controlled by humans. We just don't know how they think, how they develop, and which is why artificial intelligence poses greater threats in their world, but however not in our world. So proud to propose.
Negative claim that the sense of human self is so fragile that the moment you take away a job, you are simply left homeless. But that was obviously not the reality of this world. Because in the status quo, people find meaning in a myriad of ways. People show up to debating tournaments on the weekend to try and give arguments that are compelling and persuasive. People choose to spend time engaging in practices like sport because the competitive urge fills them with desire and drive. People do things that are not economically motivated, like working in charities, because they believe that a sense of giving to people is something that they find sufficiently meaning. People go and teach simply for the sake of that enjoy teaching. I think all of that alone would suggest that the necessity of work that they want to claim simply does not exist, and that in a world in which jobs are not something that are required, that they are not something that people need to contribute to, people are more than capable of being able to find often far more fulfilling means by which they can give themselves a life purpose, meaning, happiness. 3 questions then in this speech. Firstly, briefly responding to safety. Secondly, dealing with their push on meaning. And finally, explaining why our world is a far more tolerable and equitable one. Firstly, dealing with safety and the 2 pushes they have here. First thing they explain is, government fucks distribution. Obviously, governments still control things like the distribution of resources in their world, but obviously, in their world, it's people who notably are far more susceptible to corruption than what we give you, which is a benevolent AI that does economics and resource management, which seems far more efficient at being able to distribute those resources in a way that is equitable, mathematical, because the level of bias that's there, or the level of personal incentive corruption is far, far less. Their response to that immediately is the second thing to say, but if AI goes rogue, then your side is the one that's fucked, but ours is fine. Notably, at the point either side is able to optimize the delivery of resources, which is an example of what they suggest of jobs like agriculture that don't exist, that already suggests you're at a sufficient enough level of technological development where both sides have AI. If AI goes rogue, it does not matter the capacity to which you actually are able to implement that AI, because AI itself is so sufficiently advanced and the point is able to feed itself its own data sets, it becomes so advanced that it hits the point where if it chose to go rogue, the difference we're talking about is not our society is destroyed and theirs is fine. It is, does the world end in maybe 2 weeks or does it end in 1? I think that alone would suggest that AI going rogue isn't actually something they can stand behind simply because it doesn't work for the debate, because it symmetrizes everything down to nothing, and pretty much any level of automation screws society, so I don't think that's a sufficient push for them to win this debate. The final thing they say is that, well, governments themselves just have more control over you in a world in which you're not engaging in things like work. I would note that obviously there are incentives for democracy to still exist to the extent most people probably would believe that you still need policies regarding and managing behavior of people. But even if that's not the case, I would simply suggest that governments having a higher degree of power over you is contingent on the fact that those governments are going to make worse decisions on their side, sorry, on our side than it is in theirs, I think the logic saying, there are less people in government is probably an insufficient response to that, especially given a lot of the reasons why people make those bad decisions, which I'll deal with later, are often contingent on impulses that no longer exist. Because notably, you do not have things like a profit incentive, for example, at the point everyone's needs are relatively equally fulfilled, and centralizing resources is something that is way harder to achieve in a way in which effectively you're socializing the distribution of them. I think that sufficiently deals with any of their safety material, which suggests that on that grounds, our world is at least as safe, if not better, in terms of how we're able to deliver resources. Let's now deal with the stuff on meaning, inferring that I've already mitigated this substantially from my introduction. They claim a series of reasons to why work itself is particularly important. A couple of responses to this. First thing they explain is that, well, because there is work on our level, on the type of work that they're doing, is something that's going to be meaningful to all people. Notably, though, this relies on the fact that large amounts of people are able to access this type of work, which I'm going to respond to now, thus proving that even if, in their best case, work is really good for people, it is distributed in a way that is fundamentally inequitable, and so is still bad and something we should avoid as a society. 3 responses then. Firstly, the types of work that they're implying, given that a lot of their baseline stuff, like for example farming no longer exists, indicates that it will require a high level of specialization. That is to say, if it has not been automated, it has to be quite complex work that cannot be done by the level of automation that exists on their side. Secondly, this also means it requires things like decades of training in order to be able to get to that point which you're able to sufficiently do that. That would suggest on its own that you cannot just have randoms sub in, or you cannot have people rotate around to the extent you're distributing that work equitably, because it's all extraordinarily high concept level. Note then that means their failure at first to engage with material Isaac gives in his speech when he explains to you how the social power dynamics of their world are going to be in such a way that the jobs that they most automate are people from lower classes, and there's no incentive to lift those people up in their world, which then suggests you have an underclass in their world that is far more prominent and far more disprivileged, that is not able to access the types of work that's fulfilling, but also doesn't have the same ability of our world of having far more of their basic needs met, and thus able to engage in things that are far more beneficial to them, noting as well that our world is more equitable in the sense that no one has the unique access to this type of labor, given the implication of the motion itself is that just our level of automation means we can cover all of those things, and so everyone does have the same level of need that you can just go on and do other things with your life. The second thing to say though, dealing with it a little bit less charitably, is just to say a lot of the reasons they give for why work is good are actually pretty bad. They claim that external validation is really good and it's an equal time to work. And note, obviously, there are a variety of other ways you can experience external validation, literally just someone complimenting you on being good at anything that's not necessarily just work-related. But obviously, at the point your desire to engage in things like work isn't intrinsically motivated, but extrinsically motivated, that is necessarily a detriment on your own happiness, because not a desire that is self-propelled is a desire that is imposed upon you, which means even if fulfilling that desire gives you a comparative level of benefit, in some instances, it is never as high of a benefit as when that desire is intrinsically motivated because of a self-generated desire, and therefore its fulfillment is one that rounds you out far more because you both establish the goal and accomplishment rather than it being forced upon you, something that is far better in terms of both building a sense of identity, because you are fulfilling a goal that you yourself have designed and set out to follow, but also the fact that it is a far more difficult process to do, and so one that is far more rewarding both in the process of achieving it and the actual achieving it itself. The second thing to say is that the world they apply is still a fundamentally extraordinarily coercive one. That is to say that you still are working for presumably some kind of boss who can threaten things like you losing resources, who can pressure you into doing things you do not necessarily want to do. Those are not things that exist on our side at the point you don't have to ever opt into this type of work if it is something you do not choose to do so. Even if you weigh that harm only very minimally in the day, that is still something that tips the debate in our side fairly substantially. Thirdly, it just undermines the dignity of the human person, because any type of work ultimately relates someone down to the kinds of level of economic output and production that they commit, as opposed to the actual utility that they as an individual bring to the world. It becomes about what their role is. Note, for example, how in the status quo, people are largely defined and introduce themselves by what types of labor they engage in. For example, hi, my name is Dan, I'm a university student. That type of thing does not exist to the same extent on their world, because on our world, because in our world you're defining yourself far more by hobbies and things you self-direct into, as opposed to work that is externally forced upon you, and that the options for that work are already limited by the fact that you have types of AI. I think the final new claim to this that I haven't responded to yet is that some people are paralyzed by choice, and it's important to force these people into things. Obviously, you can always turn to other people to help force you into things or ask for things like advice, but also at the point you are struck with paralysis, I think that is far better in a world in which you're not then using coercion as the metric by which you make someone decide something. Even if you can't make a choice, it seems better to leave someone in paralysis and let them figure that out for themselves than have to deal with that. I think that fully responds to that the best case, their benefits of work are not exclusive to their side, but in their worst, the benefits are actively harmful, and it's a type of work we wish to avoid. Finally then, a new point is substantive about why we commit no tolerance society, noting this only expands upon all the material Isaac's giving you that's unresponded to about how inequitable their world is on a fundamental and structural level. One, their world necessarily is far closer to the norms of the status quo than ours because of the fact there is a comparatively lower level of automation. So the work and their societal makeup is roughly far more comparable to the one in which we live than the one that we propose. The impact of this means a large amount of the toxic social norms that exist in concurrent culture are far more likely to exist in their world because concepts like capitalism and structured workforces still exist. Notably, many people, as a result of those conditions in the status quo, develop pretty severe mental conditions, or to the extent where you are already born with certain types of those conditions, for example, a type of mental illness or something like neurodivergency, you are structurally harder to function in those types of environments because of the fact it is a workforce that is set up for a majority and not designed for you. Notably, at the point where that work then, okay, reasons as to why those conditions make you feel bad are things like competitive market pressure, the fact that it is a rat race in terms of trying to progress up so you can better your own situation because you're constantly worried, for example, losing your job and not being able to supply yourself anymore, and also the fact that because of these competing pressures, you have a variety of other social norms brought about that's toxic. Our world fundamentally shifts those in a way in which you never have to engage with those work practices and never experience the impacts of that in a way that means, for example, someone who is ADHD or neurodivergent is far better able to manage their own life without that type of toxic structure imposed on them in a way that's far healthier to them. At the end of this debate, it is a world that's more equitable, it is a world that is more free, it is a world where people could choose what they want, where they had purpose, where they had meaning. It's why we were proud to affirm it.
Solving for the problem of scarcity, solving for the resources that keep our physical forms going, the food, the water, the energy that powers our homes, would be the greatest gift humanity could ever be handed. To free up the intellectual capacity of every single person on the planet, no longer would people whose minds might have profound depths be relegated to fields or to sweatshops or to mines, but could, instead of turning to the question of the subsistence of the species, direct their attention to future endeavors, to space travel, to unlocking the human genome, to intellectual endeavors. And I'm sure the people in this room who are shackled by resource scarcity, who are shackled by the kind of work that we don't have to do anymore, could scarcely even imagine. And this team would take that gift and they would suckle at the digital teat of this AI that would distribute them resources, rather than pushing ourselves, rather than taking every ounce of intellectual energy we have and devoting it towards meaningful work that progressed our species further. Their world was a world where you did not have work and organization and the impetus and drive to do things that you might not otherwise want to do, to make sacrifices, to make trade-offs. People in this world are babies, and people in our world go to space. People in our world direct themselves to the philosophical questions that have plagued our species for thousands of years. People in our world produce research you could never even imagine in the world that we live in right now. Absolutely a world that we prefer. Let's firstly in this speech ask the question of what is work. This team tells you that work is turning to yourself to the question of subsistence and resources in some respect. We tell you that that work in our world is not overwhelmingly these things and is the kind of meaningful stuff that we talk about. But work at its core, as I've alluded to in my introduction already, is having to make trade-offs. Having to trade off other things that you might care about or other desires that you might have for something that you don't feel like doing right now. Work is challenges. Keeping at things for a long time without the promise of an immediate reward, without being able to jump on the hedonic treadmill immediately. Work is tolerating failure after failure and attempt after attempt because you know that you have to and you have to keep going. The work is collaboration when you don't get on with the people around you, when you have to overcome interpersonal challenges, when you have to get along with people you might not otherwise ever get along with. Work is planting a garden that you will never get to see. It's contributions for future generations such that they might have something to build on. Work is working on a problem when you are not the star, when you are not the leader, when you are a small part of something that is so much bigger than yourself. This is a team that only knows themselves, but they don't know themselves because doing things that you don't want to do because somebody needs you to feel needed, to feel pro-social, or because it is simply the right thing to do is what shapes the human spirit, is what shapes the human psyche. We do not know who we are without it. So it's incredibly flippant of this team to ignore the material we give you at Arch about the way that behavioral biology has helped our species progress to the point that we exist at right now. We tell you that not only is this a preferable world to live in terms of the utility we're able to create, in terms of the meaning we're able to create, it's also just a preferable world because honestly, this is the only kind of model where humanity even psychologically copes with automation at a significant level. We can still feel important. We can still feel like we're doing something that is necessary. We still feel like people need us. These guys want to point to hobbies and people finding meaning in other ways, like how we're all here at a debating tournament. You know what? I got kicked in the teeth at debating for years. I almost quit countless times, but I didn't. That is work. It doesn't matter that I didn't get paid for it. It was making trade-offs for other things that I cared about in the immediacy, not immediately jumping on the hedonic treadmill to something that fulfilled me in that moment that I was already good at, but sticking it out until the end. That was important. Equally though, work that I do for actual money or actual resources that I am able to do in something that I love, like I love being a debating coach. I love watching kids' faces light up when I tell them how to run mechanisms. It's something I care about so much. And that is the kind of utility that people still get in our world. Ask yourself why people who are, for instance, housewives who are fully economically catered to do still often get bored when their kids leave the house. Do still often struggle to find meaning when they don't have a purpose anymore. It is because we were not meant to be idle. It is not just capitalism telling you you need to be productive. It is your own biology telling you that you will die if you do not, telling you that the pack will leave you behind if you do not, you are not productive. And very simply, we give people ways to be productive that don't annihilate them, that do not force them into coal mines, that do not force them into fields, that can do something meaningful for the species. We give people the best kind of work possible. Work itself was not bad. It is the conditions that people are forced to work in a world of base resource scarcity. Let's secondly talk in this speech about danger and suffering of people in this world. What do they tell us? They firstly say, this debate has benevolent AI. Few responses. 1, can't fear this. 2, don't prove why benevolence is even likely. 3, I would actually say, and powerful response here, is that concepts like malevolent and benevolent don't even apply to AI that's this advanced because there is no moral code that is similar between us and it. It is completely distinct, doesn't think the same as us, which is precisely why it is so dangerous. Why is AI not such a danger in our world? 1, because the nature of the AI itself. Guys, you can create a fairly stupid AI that is able to till a field. If you still, like we explain, have a public servant that works for 3 hours a day that makes sure that goes to the right place because that is what they find meaningful. We simply do not need to create the kind of really powerful general artificial intelligence that is capable of synthesis, that is capable of doing all of the things that cyber affirmative needs it to do. These guys need an AI that's so powerful it could run all of humanity forever if nobody ever wanted to do anything else with their life. They say that people will not be couch potatoes. That is fine. They need to create an AI that is so powerful that it has the contingency that it could survive, and that everyone on Earth could survive if they did decide to be couch potatoes. That is a very powerful AI. We simply do not need that. Second, the reliance on the AI that we described. 1, you need to one-time relinquish control over to this. You can't get it back. It is simply too powerful. You do not have access to the same information as it. Second, you do not have adequate, in the interim, expertise and organization because you do not have people towards a common drive, making self-sacrifices, showing up when they occasionally don't want to, even though we explain that they have to show up far less under our world, which is still a good thing, but occasionally having to make those trade-offs. You don't have people working as they described for decades so that they can become a doctor or so they can become a lawyer. The doctors and lawyers are fucking AI, and that's scary. And you don't have, and if anything goes wrong, you have no contingencies. Humanity is suckling at a digital teat. We are babies in a big and empty universe. It is no way to live. Second claim that they have is they say, well, you force people to, we're a team that forces people to work through fear. 1, yeah, maybe, like the fear of failure is something you will probably always experience. I experience it in my hobbies all the time, but this fear is not the same as the fear that exists in the status quo. Do not believe their rhetoric about not being able to put food on the table. We automated agriculture. The other thing to say here though, so we explain that many countries or jurisdictions that have tried things like the pretty generous welfare payments or UDI still find that people don't want to live on them forever, that they still want some kind of work there. There are also, for instance, strong normative forces to work. That's the normative forces that I just described, right? That it is a good thing to do things because other people need you to. That it is a good thing to do things you don't want to do because it is the right thing to do. And there are, secondly, other incentives. Like we're happy to give the astronauts that we send to space nicer houses, whatever. All of this and all of this, I would encourage you to take all of this and weigh it against the suffering we describe of fundamental affront to the human sense of self, of walking around every day like an automaton because you don't know who you are, you don't know what your moral code is anymore. That is suffering. Like walking around every day without the dignity of work, without the dignity of self-sacrifice is hell. Thirdly, though, the third thing they say is that, well, there would still be an incentive for democracy, these kind of worst harms would not occur. Why would there still be an incentive for democracy? Policies and politicians and democracy exist primarily to facilitate the obtaining of and manage limited resources. There is not sufficient incentive to have in the adequate levels of democratic representation. And you do not have people publicly participating in civic life because they don't have the expertise to do so. They also don't have the incentive to do so if they are doing the things that these guys describe. They lastly talk about inequality with access to, with respect to access to jobs. We simply say that when you have the total kind of when you have access to the total of human intelligence, there are millions and millions of possibilities for jobs that people can do, likely not to be a problem there. So proud to close.
Everyone good? Well, that was certainly a rhetorically delightful introduction from Connor there, but unfortunately just factually wrong. Because the problem with this case is there wasn't some artificial distinction between what work was and hobbies were, such that some activities were work and some activities were only hobbies. What we told you on side negative was the distinction between work and the distinction between not work was whether you were forced to do it or whether you chose to do it. If you chose to do something without any external motivation, without any external reward, because you enjoyed doing the thing in and of itself, then it was a hobby, then it was leisure, then it was something you would still do on our side. But if it's something that you only did, because if you didn't do it, you'd not be given the resources you need to live, you'd not be given the resources you need to achieve your other goals and to pursue your leisure, pursue your various other activities, then it was work, and on our side, we would free you from that particular shackles. On our side, you do what you will because you can. On their side, you do what you must, which is exactly why side affirmative should take this debate. So, the big push we get in that speech is just to say, well, things like research, philosophy, art, and pushing humanity towards space are all really exciting possibilities that will never be unlocked on side affirmative, but will only be unlocked on side negative. But we would suggest that that is unlikely. To the extent that people genuinely enjoy thinking about philosophy, to the extent that people genuinely enjoy the thought of advancing science, to the extent that people genuinely enjoy producing art, seeing other people enjoy their art, performing that art for other people, advancing their own craft, which we would suggest very large numbers of people do. We know that because lots of people do these things without being paid. There are citizen scientists who just engage in science because it's their hobby. There are artists who have never sold a single ticket, but they just love putting their work out there. There are researchers who continue to do that research in their own time because it's just what fascinates them. Those things would continue to occur, and side affirmative would accrue all of those very same benefits of human development. Maybe we would get less of it than side negative, but the reason we would get less is because it would be the revealed preference of people not to do that work on our side, but they would be coerced into doing it on their side. And we would say if that people made the decision that instead of engaging in space research or whatever, they wanted to spend a bit more time with their family, they wanted to pursue the things that gave them meaning in their life, they wanted to do the hobbies that they really enjoyed and made them happy, then that was an absolute win on side affirmative. We would happily cop less human development. They never explained why it was that abstracts like wealth generation or human development was happy, except for the fact that it could make people happier in the long run, except for the fact that it was therefore a means to achieving benefits for humanity. We say on our side, we would just let people do what they wanted from the get-go. So, let's delve into this case. 3 things. I'll deal with the issue of fulfillment and then deal with the stuff on government power and AI. Let's talk about fulfillment. They suggest work is necessary for fulfillment, and they give us a bunch of reasons that just basically boil down to, well, you like it, it's validating, and evolution says so, blah, blah, blah. I would ask one simple question that I think explains it. Does it seem more likely that the thing that provides you fulfillment is a thing you do because you genuinely love doing it, even though no one else is paying you to do it? Or is it more likely to get fulfillment out of doing the thing that you literally only do because you get some reward at the end for doing it? It probably makes more sense that the things that fulfill you, for example, the hobbies, like debating, which you spend money on doing and actually put a lot of work into, rather than, for example, the job, which you only show up to because they coerce you with a whole bunch of money for doing it, because that money allows you to to, for example, do the hobby in the first place. Which suggests that work is probably very unlikely to be a source of fulfillment, and it's in fact far more likely to be something that takes away from your capacity to achieve fulfillment. The second thing we'd identify, though, is just that even if you believe that perhaps what they're suggesting is that, well, work is good because it provides a set of useful things like structure, like motivation, and like meaning, we would suggest that it's unclear that everyone benefits from those things. Like, it sounds good to just say, well, people need structure and motivation, etc., but like, maybe some people prefer not having structure to their day. Maybe some people have different preferences and would benefit from not having to do those things. Just because it caters to some people who are in privileged positions to construct society doesn't mean it applies to everyone within that society. But secondly, we would suggest that it's clearly patently true that many people are locked out of the structures of work in the way that they exist right now, and Dan provides great new analysis for this at Second Affirmative when they talk about how neurodiverse people or people who are differently abled, for example, might find the structures of work confining, might feel like they're forced into those structures when they do not assist them, and that society coerces them into doing those things anyway, which is wrong. But thirdly, we explain to you a set of structural reasons why work must be bad that they don't respond to. That it's coercive because you only do it for external reward, because you fear being deprived of resources that you need to live or need to achieve happiness in other ways. Like if you don't do the work, you don't get the money that you need to do your hobbies, or to pay your rent, or to survive. All of those things suggest that work in and of itself is a bad thing. But secondly, that it intrinsically must have a hierarchy, because there's someone above you who uses the implicit threat of depriving you of resources and making your life worse if you don't do what they say. And thirdly, the fact that it strips you of your dignity, because it suggests that your value is not in who you are, it's not in the fact that you are a unique human being, it's in that you might be able to produce something that someone else values. That is your only value, is only what you produce, which is why we say that work is wrong. Finally, though, we suggest that work inherently, and the system of government they stand for, is inherently one that is unequal. Because when you have work, you have hierarchy, you have some people who are more important within that hierarchy than others, you have some people who produce more stuff than others. They provide no explanation as to why this wouldn't necessarily lead to a society which some people are valued more than others, which neatly dovetails into the question of government power. Because their claim here is just that the government on our side would be very bad because, who knows what it would do? Maybe it would fail to provide resources for something. We would suggest that the question is probably comparatively better on our side, where everyone has an equal level of political power because everyone just engages in various forms of leisure activities. No one has hierarchy over anyone else. No one has the capacity to inflict coercive power on anyone else. No one is more important than anyone else, compared to their side, where there clearly is a hierarchy, where clearly there are some people who are more important than other people, and as a result, gain benefits above them. We would suggest that seems far more likely to generate the kinds of inequalities where you'd be able to deprive some people of resources as compared to others. Their push in the second negative speech is to suggest, why would democracy exist if there was no scarcity? Democracy exists to solve scarcity, but that concedes there wouldn't be a problem. Like if you have infinite resources, it doesn't matter how you divide them, any share of infinity is like sufficient to meet your needs, so who really cares about that? But finally, it seems very likely that both sides have given up very large amounts of control of the economy to the government and probably are relatively reliant on that government to be benevolent. It seems reasonable to just assume that would be the case on both sides. Secondly, on the issue of AI, once again, this seems incredibly symmetric because both sides seem to have automated massive amounts of the economy. Like, they want you to believe farming and energy and manufacturing and transport and everything works automatically, and somehow the AI on their side is just so much less sophisticated than the AI on our side. And the way they get away with this is by literally walking back massive amounts of the first part of their case in that speech by suggesting, well, on our side, we'd still have doctors, we'd still have lawyers, we'd still have all these different people, so the AI wouldn't need to automate that work. One, huge concession in terms of their stuff, but there'd be very little work on our side. You'd only be doing 1 or 2 specialized tasks a week. No, apparently like all white-collar professionals still have to exist in this world, or they concede the AI point, because an AI that is a doctor and a lawyer and supervises various other things is clearly sophisticated enough to have all of the risks of being evil on their side, or all of the risks of annihilating the world, whatever the claim is there. Lastly, just want to point out that they literally suggest in that speech that one person's job would be to like watch the tractors and make sure they don't like kill someone. Does that sound like fulfilling work that people would opt into voluntarily, or does that sound like explicitly the type of drudgery that you'd have to coerce someone into? Look, at the end of this debate, the question was very simple. Work wasn't a specific set of activities, work was a state of motivation. It was when you didn't do something because you loved it, it was when you did something because you had to, because if you did not, you wouldn't be able to do the things that did make you happy, you wouldn't be able to continue to exist. Side affirmative frees you from the constraints of work, side negative demands that you do more.
Humans are uniquely bad at regulating to keep themselves doing something that they might not in the short term enjoy in order to access some long-term benefit. Whether this is a benefit sometimes far in the future by developing a skill, whether this is a benefit for humanity as a whole, or whether this is a benefit for like some generation which they will not see. Without having an incentive, without having some kind of force to ensure that you keep showing up and you keep dedicating yourself to something, humanity will be at a standstill, people won't be able to access the hobbies that they truly enjoy, and people are going to be living far more meaningless lives. This is where side negative gets up in this debate. Okay, let's be very clear about what the change between these, or at least what the difference between these two teams in the debate is. Clearly, work is defined by like an incentive to keep going, by providing some incentive for people to like show up to something that perhaps on some days they don't want to do. No, this something isn't like manual labor or something that is incredibly soul crushing, because in a post-scarcity society this doesn't exist. This is more like ethical consideration, this is more like art, and this is more like things that interest you. Without having this external incentive, you pretty much just don't get better at this thing, or you don't truly develop this thing. Side opposition says this will still exist in a hobby form. We would know it'll be to a significantly worse extent. To the extent that you don't keep showing up, to the extent you don't keep putting in the effort, you're likely to be far less fulfilled by this activity. Okay, 3 things in this speech. First of all, I'm going to be looking at like the future developments argument, I'm going to be looking at the safety arguments, and then I'm going to be looking at like the who gets more development argument. Given the side opposition hasn't really spent as much time as they need on like the safety points and the future development points, I'm going to step through the impacts after I guess like removing their issues with this point. Okay, first on the idea of safety and artificial intelligence. The main push we hear from side opposition is that the AI is like kind of symmetrically intrusive on both sides of the house. This is a misunderstanding of our case. Given that the main things that like people are going to be doing on our side of the house are like ethical considerations and I guess moral and artistic thinking, we think it is uniquely bad to replace this group with AI, because artificial intelligence simply doesn't have a moral code that we can like I guess understand. It is not intellectually compatible with us. There is no way of regulating this kind of action. This means you get significantly more intrusive like artificial intelligence on side opposition. Side opposition says it is incredibly likely that like AI is going to be like benevolent, whatever that means. We tell you this is like pretty much quite unlikely. Given like all the mechanisms I said above about artificial intelligence being quite hard to understand, there is a very high chance that in like all of the future of humanity, at some point it just like hits a speed bump that makes it go completely haywire. What are the harms to this? The harms to this are, first of all, artificial intelligence just like deciding that humanity is a blight on the earth, perhaps it has been instructed to protect and therefore like destroying us. Second thing here is just like hurting a like minority of the population in order to somehow serve the majority. This is like a result of just like I guess incorrect programming. And third of all, just like in general breaking and like not being able to do these complex tasks in which we enforce it to do. On our side of the house, we have people that are at least intellectually stimulated and at least driven to make trade-offs and at least driven to like somehow replace this artificial intelligence. So where side opposition says that it's like pretty much symmetrical artificial intelligence, this isn't going to work in this debate. On the idea of government that use similar responses, it's just going to be like I guess run by artificial intelligence, so it's not going to be that destructive. Same responses, AI can break, humans need to oversee this thing. That's why it is incredibly important for the safety of humanity. We have some people that are still driven to show up every day, regardless if it is a hard thing to do. Now on this idea of future development, we tell you that like in order to get future development of humanity, you need some kind of sacrifice, you need some kind of like long-termism that isn't going to occur if people can just do whatever the hell they want, because getting development of like, I don't know, going to space or like figuring out the human genome are quite hard to achieve. What are opposition's response here? They say that this is quite like a marginal benefit. To the extent that we achieve these things, people aren't going to be that much happier. This is just like not a response that works, because in the world the opposition proposes, there are going to be a set of unhappinesses that like people just generally accept. This is just like, I don't know, like if you feel like you want to be like, I don't know, genetically stronger, but somehow can't, or like you really want to go to space, or like expand humanity as a species. These are things that people would just like accept on side opposition, because there is no way to keep them like to, I guess, continually show up in order to get these benefits, and therefore to just raise the general quality of life. This is something that side opposition can never access, and it is a significant benefit, given the fact that, you know, it would just like raise the general quality of life of the entire population, multiply that raising the quality of life by the population, huge benefit. Okay, now to this issue of who gets more fulfillment. We hear a few things from side opposition. First thing here is that like They say that the reason we think that we need a job to feel fulfilled is because capitalism has indoctrinated us to do so. First of all, they never really get around a psychological mechanism. Pretty much for all of humanity, humans have been like programmed that like if you don't provide for people, you just are going to die. We have a significant like psychological aspect that drives us to like, I guess, produce something. This is something that goes on opposition side of the house because simply put, people aren't discriminated. They say that perhaps, these people are going to be coerced into jobs that like aren't that great. I would also just like to point out, the jobs on our side of the house aren't the jobs in the status quo. This isn't the soul-crushing 9-to-5s, because these are automated. These are jobs that people find entertaining, jobs that people find enjoying, however, need some incentive to keep showing up to, otherwise they'll just quit because they had a bad day or two. Side opposition tries to get around this by saying that the status quo shows that some people can get personal fulfillment from doing just like, I don't know, like charity or teaching or whatever. We tell you that this is only because it's tempered with the existence of the external validation of having a job, and and the second response here is that like this is probably a minority of the population. The next thing side opposition tries to do is they say that, people are like generally intrinsically motivated, that they don't need like extrinsic reward in order to feel good. I guess like see the like psychological benefit of just like, I don't know, serving a pack, and also just on like a numbers basis, we think it's way better to feel rewarded by an entire society than just you yourself. If you play the numbers game, that's just one person telling you did a good job versus everyone telling you did a good job. That is a significant larger piece of utility. Okay, next thing we hear from side opposition is that work is inherently dehumanizing. We tell you this is simply untrue because work provides identity. You are made up by the kinds of trade-offs you make, by the kinds of things that you pursue, even when they're hard because there are some kind of incentives, and not just like who you are when you're sitting around on the couch. And also, on this idea of like identity, we would just push opposition to be comparative. The majority of the population, or at least a significant percentage, aren't going to have the drive in order to like pursue intrinsic excellence. This part of the population is uniquely ignored by side opposition because they're just going to feel completely lost. They're going to have nothing to do. They're going to feel like they've been rejected by society, and they just have to deal with that sadness for the rest of their lives. And everyone, like in the future of humanity who feels like that, is going to have to deal with that sadness for the rest of their lives. So even if they provide some people some level of identity, we tell you that it's just not worth the trade-off of a bunch of people just like, I guess, living lives that are completely monotonous because they don't have the intrinsic drive you need to access the benefits that side opposition wants to propose. Next few responses we hear from side opposition can be dealt with quite quickly on the idea of there's going to be like some amount of economic inequality. Two responses here. First of all, it's a post-scarcity society. It's largely been automated. So if there is inequality, it's just not likely to be that bad. And because of that same thing, second response here is that any inequality and any kind of power structure is quite likely to be minimal. It's not going to be imposing on people because it doesn't need to ensure people are producing to survive. It just needs to incentivize like people to do things that are likely in their interests. This means any kinds of inequality or power structures are likely to be, not very intrusive. Okay, because we decide that ensures the safety of humanity, because we decide that ensures humanity can go to a different level of enjoyment of life, and because we decide that gives people the incentives to be fulfilled, we are so proud to negate. Thank you.